In February of 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Belarus played a direct role as a staging ground, reflecting its close alliance with Moscow and long-standing dependence on Russian economic support and security guarantees. In the weeks before the invasion, Russia had deployed more than 30,000 troops to Belarus under the cover of joint military exercises called Union Resolve 2022. The exercise would later be considered as part of the prelude to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. With President Alexander Lukashenko's approval, Russian forces remained in place and formed the spearhead of the Northern Plan, opening a front just 150 kilometers from Kiev. The Northern Plan was Russia's push from Belarus and Russia's Bryansk region down toward Kiev, Ukraine's capital. The goal was simple: seize Kiev within a few days, decapitate the Ukrainian government by capturing and killing the leader and top-ranking officials, and then install a pro-Russian regime. From this launch area, the Northern Plan moved along two main directions. Force V, built around the 35th Combined Arms Army, moved west of the Dnipro to isolate Kiev and seize the government district. Force O, built around the 41st Combined Arms Army, pushed past Chernihiv to cut the capital from the northeast. Together, the two groups were meant to encircle Kiev and trap its defenders. At the same time, a battalion tactical group from the 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade flew in on 34 to 40 Mi-8 helicopters with Mi-24 and Ka-52 escorts to seize Antonov Airport at Hostomel. The objective was to secure a runway for Il-76 transports to bring in reinforcements. Russian Spetsnaz, or Special Forces, were already in Kiev to target leaders, while the National Guard, or Rosgvardia, was assigned to police the city once it fell. Well, that was the plan. Putin's intel services told him Kiev would surrender fast and locals would welcome Russian troops. The Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, even claimed Kiev could be taken in just 3 to 4 days. Just a few days in, Russia's planners were quick to realize they had massively underestimated Ukrainian resistance. Local militias, special forces, and citizen volunteers held tight, ambushing supply convoys and decimating exposed armor. A glaring symbol of Russian logistical failure was the infamous 40-mile convoy parked north of Kiev, a column of supply trucks, tanks, artillery, and armored vehicles stretching some 64 kilometers that just sat there, vulnerable to drone strikes and artillery fire. Because fuel, parts, and ammunition couldn't reach the front reliably, many units stalled in their tracks, waiting to be taken out by Ukrainian drones. By late March and early April 2022, after taking heavy losses and failing to break through, Russia began withdrawing from Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy, and Zhytomyr oblasts. The failure of the Northern Axis forced Russia to abandon its decapitation strategy and shift to a slow grinding warfare in the east and south. The speed and coordination of Ukraine's defense did not just happen overnight. Deeper reforms had been underway since Russia's 2014 intervention in Crimea and Donbass. At that time, only about 6,000 troops were combat ready, but Kiev, sensing that Putin would desire more territory, reorganized its army and modernized its training. During this period, Ukraine was not part of NATO or the European Union, but Western partners stepped in. Britain launched Operation Orbital in 2015, and Canada began Operation Unifier the same year. Together, these missions trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers to NATO standards. Among other munitions, the United States also sold 210 Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine in 2018. By then, the army had grown to nearly 200,000 active soldiers, supported by new territorial defense forces made up of civilian volunteers. So when Russia began building up along Ukraine's borders in late 2021, the country already had 8 years of reform and foreign support behind it. In January 2022, 1 month before the invasion, Britain delivered thousands of NLAW anti-tank launchers, and the United States and Baltic allies supplied Ukraine with Stinger missiles. Ukraine was ready for what was coming, but Russia wasn't. Putin's failed assault on Kiev cost Moscow soldiers, equipment, and credibility. But the war did not end there. The setback forced Russia to regroup and shift its offensive toward the south and east, aiming to capture the Donbass region and Ukraine's Black Sea coast. By then, Ukraine had fully mobilized and was gaining increasing Western support. Speaking of Western support, Putin tried to counter that by turning to his most powerful economic weapon: energy. Moscow used its leverage over Europe's dependence on Russian gas to try to pressure European governments to pull back their support for Ukraine. On March 31, 2022, Putin demanded that foreign buyers of Russian pipeline gas, especially from unfriendly countries, pay in rubles instead of euros or dollars, or face supply cuts. This demand was rejected by many European governments. Then, shortly after the decree, gas flow through the Yamal-Europe pipeline to Germany via Poland was shut off. In April of 2022, Gazprom announced the suspension of gas supply to Poland via the Yamal pipeline and to Bulgaria, claiming they didn't pay in rubles per the new rule. In May, Gazprom informed Finland that natural gas deliveries would be halted because Finland refused to pay in rubles under the new scheme. By June, Denmark and the Netherlands faced similar gas cuts. The biggest clash was with Germany. In June and July, Gazprom reduced gas flows through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, claiming turbine problems, and on August 31st, it shut the pipeline down completely. Moscow's goal was to pressure Germany to consider siding with Russia or at least not support Ukraine. Instead, Chancellor Olaf Scholz sped up the construction of new liquefied natural gas or LNG terminals at Wilhelmshaven and Brunsbüttel, signed supply deals with the United States, Norway, and Qatar, and announced that Germany would no longer rely on Russian energy. As many European Union states accelerated diversification, sanctions were placed on Russia's oil exports, reassuring Putin that Europe can survive without Russian oil and gas. After losing its main European market, Russia shifted its exports east, selling at discounted prices, partly due to the sanctions. By 2023, India and China had become the two largest buyers of Russian oil. When Moscow reduced supplies, it expected European governments to soften their support for Ukraine. Instead, the cuts led Europe to strengthen ties with Kiev, while the United States took on a larger role as both a security and energy partner. The geopolitical pressure has only increased since then. On September 9th, President Trump urged the European Union to impose tariffs of up to 100% on Chinese and Indian imports of Russian oil as part of a plan to pressure Moscow into ending the war in Ukraine. Having long used its oil and gas as political leverage, Russia is now facing the same tactic in return. Ukraine is now also targeting the oil refineries and energy infrastructure more than ever. On September 18th of this year, Ukrainian drones set fire to a unit at the Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat complex in Bashkortostan. On September 24th, a larger attack struck the same site, hitting the ELOUAVT-6 crude distillation unit, which is the main facility for processing oil at the plant. The strike caused severe damage and disrupted production across the complex. Drones also struck the Ufa refinery in Bashkortostan and the Volgograd refinery along the Volga River. In August and September alone, Ukraine hit 16 refineries with a combined annual capacity of 123 million tons of crude, about 38% of Russia's refining capacity. By targeting multiple facilities in a short period, Kiev has reduced Russia's ability to supply fuel for both military operations and civilian use. These attacks succeeded because Russia's strongest air defenses are concentrated elsewhere. Moscow, as the political center and home to critical government facilities, is heavily protected, as are the frontline regions of Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk, which face daily artillery and drone attacks. Rostov, a key command hub for the Southern Front, along with the Kerch Bridge and Crimea, are also shielded by S-500 Prometei systems, S-400s, and Panzer guns and missiles that use sensors and electronic signals to detect and block incoming drones or missiles. According to Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmytro Pletenchuk, Russia has placed its most advanced air defenses in Crimea rather than around its oil refineries because the peninsula is considered strategically vital. Russian planners assumed that since most refineries are deep inside the country, they were safe and low-risk targets due to their distance from the front lines. But that same distance meant they did not benefit from Russia's strongest defensive systems, leaving them exposed to Ukrainian attacks. This imbalance gave Kiev an opening. Ukraine had quickly expanded its long-range drone fleet, including loitering munitions and Lyuty, an aircraft-type drone capable of flying more than 1,000 kilometers. By flying at low altitudes to stay below radar coverage, these drones enabled Ukraine to strike deep inside Russian territory. The attacks revealed a major gap in Russia's defense strategy and showed that Ukraine was deliberately targeting the energy backbone that kept Russia's heavily defended border regions running. In Ukraine, a June 2025 assessment from the World Bank's fourth Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment estimated over $175 billion in direct damage to buildings and infrastructure since the war began. Meanwhile, data from the Russian energy agency Siala on October 2nd showed that nearly 40% of the country's oil refining capacity was offline. The Business Daily Kommersant reported a gasoline shortfall of about 400,000 tons out of the 2 million consumed each month, leading to shortages in several regions and fuel rationing in Crimea. The crisis highlights how deeply the war has damaged both countries. Yet, if Moscow had taken a different path, the outcome might have been very different. Ukraine could have remained a neutral buffer state, modernizing at its own pace while cooperating with Europe without the pressure to join NATO. It would not have needed large-scale Western aid, and Russia could have preserved its energy trade with Europe instead of losing markets and facing sanctions. That path might have led to stability and even cooperation on issues like trade and security.